Shalom and welcome to the last installment of our reading of Window on Mount Zion with the Epilogue written by Pauline Rose in Jerusalem, of course, in June 1972, so 5 years later. It is now over 5 years since the barriers dividing Jerusalem were removed, and Jews and Arabs have been able to mingle freely, although the battle for lasting peace has not yet been won. The scene on Mount Zion is constantly changing. As I look through our window on this sunny summer day, I see the tourist buses filling the Pope's parking lot, the cars filling Garden Square, and large groups of tourists. Their numbers are ever increasing, following their guides into the souvenir shop. I hear many different languages being spoken: French, German, English, Italian, Dutch, and many unfamiliar tongues as well. Mingling with the endless groups of American, English, and German-speaking tourists are dark-skinned women from Africa with their colorful robes and headscarves. Moving among the mini-skirted Westerners are Indian women in graceful saris. Some Japanese tourists have become entangled with a group of nuns. Most of them stop and peer through the iron railings where the steps leading down to our garden, and all take photos. They must really enjoy our garden on Mount Zion. The threats of renewed hostilities expressed by our neighbors neither limit the ever-increasing influx of tourists nor dampen their spirits. The throbbing pulse of the dynamic life of Jerusalem can be felt here on Mount Zion. Only in the early morning hours before the noisy activity of the day begins can the peace on Mount Zion still be felt. On one such morning, I went down into the garden to help Boutros with the watering. He is a young Christian Arab who's been helping me with the garden since 1968. His sincerity and kindness have never failed. His dark eyes are always alight with warmth, and his friendly smile and cheerful humor have so often changed a moment of heaviness into laughter and good cheer. On this early summer morning, we were surprised to see a large taxi stop at the Pope's parking lot. We looked over the stone wall of the garden and saw an Arab driver get out of his car. He appeared to be the only occupant. He opened the boot of the car and, to our amazement, began lifting out lambs. 1, 2, 3, counted Boutros, and continued with surprise. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Look, I exclaimed, as he then opened the door of the car and we watched another 6 sheep jump out. He gathered them all together and took them to the green patches near the wall on Mount Zion to find their breakfast. Boutros and I laughed. You see, said Boutros, it is so good now that we have peace. Even the sheep ride to Mount Zion in a car to seek holy food. A short while afterwards, we saw the Arab return with his passengers to the taxi and drive away. Everything happens on Mount Zion, Boutros, I said, as we finished the watering and he left to go to his regular work nearby. Before I entered the house, my first visitor had arrived. Coming up the road from Silwan was a man carrying a large bunch of flowers in one arm and a basket filled with freshly picked green figs in the other. Good morning, my sister, he said as he reached the gate. I've brought you these things from my garden. How kind of you, Ahmed, I said as I greeted my good friend and Arab neighbor. But why so much? I chided him. Because you are my sister, said Ahmed. You must get the first and best from my garden, and I know how many people come to you here. I was always deeply moved by this generous expression of friendship, but I had learnt in these last few years of contact with the Arabs that when they like someone, their generosity knows no bounds. We chatted, Ahmed and I, over a cup of Turkish coffee before he rose to go. The daily life of Mount Zion had not yet begun. I remembered the beginning of our Brotherhood of Goodwill in 1963. Then I had dreamed of having Arabs in our midst, and now the dream had come true. People of goodwill, from all circles and nations had met at Ha'ohel, and over the years had grown together, bound by the spirit of faith and love. We welcomed our Arab brethren. With the awakening of another day, I heard the first bird call and then the answering chorus as I went down as usual into the garden to savor its peace. On this June morning, as I tended to the plants, I remembered the dream garden as I'd first planned it in my mind. Its realization had been beyond all expectations. I looked at the fruit trees. We had filled baskets with delicious golden loquats each day for weeks. Now the peaches were tinted with pink and swelling in the warming sun. The little green nut pods were growing fast on the almond tree, which had blossomed early this spring. Next to it, the dainty pomegranate tree was gaily decorated with orange-colored flowers. Large clusters of grapes hung from the vines, climbing up the walls. There would be an abundance of fruit this year. The grapes, there were plums, olives, and mulberries, and the orange tree in front of the house was heavy with fruit, some of it gold and the rest still green. In this comparatively small garden of not more than 200 square meters, we now had about the same number of different flowers, shrubs, and trees. As I was contemplating the miracle of this mixture of fruit and flowers from so many different countries with different climatic conditions, all growing in such happy profusion, someone came into the garden beside me. It was Ibrahim, an Arab gardener who had created and tended for over 25 years what was held to be the most beautiful garden in East Jerusalem. He came often to see this garden, and we exchanged seeds, seedlings, and experiences. "How is your garden doing, Ibrahim?" I asked. "It is very beautiful now," he replied, "but nothing like yours. Everything here somehow seems to grow better and flower longer. I've never seen a garden like this." He had also never seen the one flower we were now watching daily, the crowning glory which I'd never expected to have in our garden, the exotic strelitzia. A group of these plants had been given to me when they were 3 years old, and were due to bloom in their 5th year. I had lovingly cherished them, waiting for the first flower. The first bud had appeared a month ago and was slowly unfolding its rare beauty. I knew this plant commonly in South Africa. It's known as the crane flower, or bird of paradise, because it bears a remarkable resemblance to the regal head of a bird with a rich golden crested crown and a deep blue long pointed beak above its grey, green and gold lined throat. Ibrahim and I looked at it in wonder. This morning it had opened its strong long beak, and I felt that at any moment a loud call would ring forth, a call to remind us that one day paradise would again be here on earth. After Ibrahim had left, I sat on the old stone bench under the mulberry trees, where the lawn was like a soft green carpet under my feet. Seen through the curtain of flowers, inside the garden wall, the hills of the Judean desert already looked brown and parched. The hot, dry wind blowing from the desert, the Khamsin, had been frequent this spring. I heard footsteps coming down the path. David, a friend from London, who'd been staying with us for some days, came to join me in the garden. "The air seems to have been sprayed with a special perfume this morning," he remarked. "Yes," I replied. "The garden always has supplies of perfume, handed on from plant to plant as the seasons change." "I remember the orange and lemon blossoms when I was here the last time," he said. "They really seem to drench the night air with their scent." "Well, this morning it's the turn of the sweet-scented jasmine, hanging over the wall behind the roses," I pointed out. As we sat for a while in silence, adding our prayer of thanksgiving to the unseen cloud which seemed to rise heavenwards like incense from every little flower in the garden. David had arrived from London the previous week when the wave of violence and terror which had rolled over the earth from faraway Japan had reached its destined target, the Lydda Airport, or known as Lod, now known as the Ben Gurion Airport. David had escaped injury, but had witnessed the scene of murderous horror when 3 young Japanese travelers, who were members of the Japanese Red Army and were recruited by the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, had opened fire on airport staff and passengers with machine guns that were hidden in their violin cases. They had fired indiscriminately into the crowd of pilgrims, tourists, and returning Israelis gathered in the customs hall. In all, 26 people were killed and another 70 wounded, innocent men, women, and children. There were 17 Christian pilgrims from Puerto Rico, 1 Canadian, and 8 Israelis. It was one of the most horrifying manifestations of the spiritual darkness and confusion which now covers almost every corner of the earth. David had come to us in a state of shock. He had spent many hours resting in the garden, and as he sat beside me now, he asked, "Do you know that in England we say that the nearness of God can be felt in a garden more than in any other place on earth? I think I feel the presence of God here more than in any other garden I've ever been in." He went on, "Each day as I sat in this garden, I could feel its peace and healing envelop me. I felt the presence so close that there were moments when I was almost overcome by a feeling of awe. I thought of the many different people who had been in this garden and who had described similar experiences. The garden had fulfilled its purpose. There was not only its peace and healing quality, but also something within it of the spirit of Mount Zion. On the day David returned to London, a week later the post brought a letter from friends living near New York, Arnold and Ruth, who had their own beautiful home and garden, and who came to Israel every year in the early summer for 3 or 4 days. The sole reason for their visit was to spend the time with us in Ha'ohel on Mount Zion. Ruth had written, "We are shocked by the Lod Airport massacre. The state of the world today makes it hard to retain one's faith and peace of mind. When I begin to feel discouraged or depressed, then I want to come to your beautiful garden and feel once more the tranquility and find new courage to go on." At the end of the day, when the sun had turned off its golden light and the noise had ceased, I walked up to the open square where the pine trees seemed to bend their outstretched branches even lower than usual, perhaps in sadness or perhaps in prayer. I sat on the bench beneath the trees, the same bench where I'd sat when I first came to walk about Mount Zion, to search for a place to make a garden and a home, and I thought of the vision and promises for the future of Mount Zion. It was on that bench I sat and sought to understand the will of the Lord concerning our coming to live on Mount Zion. So much had changed since then, so much gained and so much lost. In the midst of all the noise, it was hard to hear the voice of Zion, the message of Zion. But now, in the stillness, as the stars began to sparkle through the bowed pine trees, I sensed the spirit of Zion, its power and strength. I felt again that infinite peace, a peace born of prayers that lingered and tears that had spent themselves, a peace deep in the heart of Mount Zion, assured of its glorious future. As we read in Psalm 102, "When the Lord shall build up Zion, he shall appear in all his glory." And for that day we wait in faith. Thank you and shalom. Thank you for joining us on this adventure, this story of the building up of Mount Zion. Shalom.